Good afternoon and welcome to ChamberLIVE, Protect Your Business with Cyber Essentials. I'll start with a little rider that the views expressed in this seminar don't necessarily represent the views of the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce, and all the facts are believed to be correct at the time of recording on the 27th of April 2020. Today's webinar is presented for us by Seriun. They're an award-winning, fully managed service provider established over 15 years ago. They've got 30 staff specialising in delivering IT support, telecom solutions, bespoke software development, and their vision to inspire customers. Their vision is to inspire customers to get the best out of technology that they can. We'll be hearing from two speakers. Justin Sherwood. Justin's the Managing Director of Seriun, over 20 years experience in IT. He's a technology entrepreneur who specialises in developing solutions to overcome operational challenges faced by SMEs. And he's responsible for the strategic direction at Seriun. Also speaking is Mark Edwards. He's the operations director at Seriun. He's got over 18 years experience in IT, although he doesn't look like he's old enough when you see him. Mark's responsible for service delivery and process improvement. He provides technical and strategic guidance to customers from the ground up to board level. And he's worked with certification bodies for over 5 years and helped businesses through the Cyber Essentials process. So they're both very qualified to deliver this session on Cyber Essentials, and I will now hand over to them to take you through the rest of the afternoon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Simon. And also thanks for asking us to present this as well from the outset. It's much appreciated. What I'll do is I'll share my screen now and just make sure you can all see that. Okay. So does that come across? Is everyone okay with that? Yeah, some thumbs up there. Thanks, Jen. So what we've been asked to do today is to talk to people about Cyber Essentials. Just some background on those, which Simon's kindly done, but just really to highlight the one thing on here, which is we're an IASME Cyber Essentials partner. That basically means we're a certification body for Cyber Essentials, which we're going to go through the detail of what that is as part of this presentation. We're also a Microsoft partner, so we do a lot of work in the Microsoft stack of products. Helping people with Teams, as we talked about a little bit earlier, but also making sure that from a Microsoft and even actually an Apple standpoint, that networks are certified and prepared for Cyber Essentials, but also just correctly set up for cyber in general. We're also a 3CX partner, and what that is basically a hosted phone system. And why that's quite relevant these days is when we talk about cyber, and when we talk about protecting your business, you should also include in that discussion your phone system. There's quite a lot of fraud around at the moment, especially people working from home because they've taken parts of their phone system away with them. And some of the configuration of that can be a little bit loose, and it opens it up for fraud. So basically people to dial into your phone system and make phone calls over the weekend. So we also set up phone systems and also include those in the wider picture when it comes to cyber protection. And there's a link there in terms of meeting our team, and I think the PowerPoint is going to be sent out afterwards, so you can see who works for us and all the faces on that link. We hold the following accreditations as a business, so we're ISO certified in 9001 for quality. More relevant to this discussion, we're also 27001 for data security, and we're a Cyber Essentials certified, and we're part of what is called the IASME Consortium, which is the only UK body for certifying companies for Cyber Essentials. I'll come back to this slide later on why we feel it's important, but it just shows that hopefully that we have those accreditations already in place. What the plan really for this session is, we're going off a little bit off on a tangent actually. We were asked very kindly by the Chamber to go through the Cyber Essentials process and benefits. But we've been running some of these sessions for our customers over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and we did one on cyber security a couple of weeks ago, and we asked for questions into it, and we've actually collated some of the most popular ones together, and Justin's going to run through those in a second, just to give people an idea of how to stay cyber secure at the moment and what's happening as well. The other thing what we've done is we're going to go through the Cyber Essentials as well, and the benefits and the process of that. And at the end, have a question and answer session. So we're going to start with staying cyber secure. And I'm going to pass over to Justin now, who's going to go through some of these questions that we received, and hopefully they're good pointers in terms of how you can stay secure at this point in time.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So this slide is just to give you, it's not here to scare you, but it's just trying to give you a bit of a summary of what's happening out there from a kind of attack vector standpoint. Key point here is that there's over nearly 250,000 new variants of malware viruses that are being generated every day. And to give you some context, this is similar to a virus, a kind of real-world virus. It malware can mutate, or an attacker can effectively change the code base or its signature, so to speak, and create an unrecognized new virus. So antivirus systems potentially, certainly the old ones, potentially can't pick up that new signature. So that's why there's an alarming number there. And another key takeaway is the fact that over 90% of attacks kind of begin or start as a phishing attack. So it's an easy way to get some form of malware onto your machine without, and therefore over 90% of breaches are caused by human error. So if we could go to the next, this basically brings on to the next question. This is a popular, probably the most asked question out there. How do you spot a phishing email? So if we can address how attacks begin, we can hopefully start to seriously reduce the number of attacks that we experience in our day-to-day lives. So with that, we've kind of put together a bit of a slide to try and illustrate a phishing sort of red flag attack. And they are getting more and more sophisticated. So, it's a case of trying to do your best, but the primary, a lot of these attacks begin with a sense of urgency. They're trying to catch you off guard. So if an email comes through and it purports to be from somebody, a senior manager or C-suite, or it's from a colleague kind of purporting to be in trouble, or there's a customer in trouble that needs money transferring as quickly as possible, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a potential threat or an attack on your business or organization. Often you'll get an email sort of trying to imitate a brand. So they might register a domain name similar to a key, a blue chip company like Apple, for example, and they can go out there and register sort of Apple-Pay or Apple full stop or Apple hyphen something, not necessarily full stop, but and that can confuse users because they think that email is coming from a legitimate source. You'll often find that an email will have some form of impersonal salutation at the top, because obviously thousands, if not millions, of these emails are being sent within a short time frame. An attacker doesn't have time to try and put, verbalize a username in there or some form of specific information. However, more sophisticated attacks can have that are focused on a subset of businesses, or a targeted approach can have information on there that are specific to you. So these aren't silver bullets. They're just kind of key points to try and pick out. Grammatical errors, another key thing. Read the email. They try and kind of use a sense of urgency so that you kind of flip into a reactive mode. Rather, kind of if there's some request to click on a link or to fill out your username and password, or maybe send some money to a bank account, just rethink it, and ideally call the person over the phone rather than respond with don't hit the reply button, because some attacks are quite sophisticated and they've compromised a person's email account, and then they will purport to be that person. But more information on that we'll talk about in the coming slides. the key, links are kind of a key vector that an attacker will use to try and either get you to launch a link which will put a payload onto your device, or take you off to another website that will look like Apple Pay, and you will put your username and password in. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that will kind of, the website will just give you an error, or it will just do nothing, and you'll think nothing of it. You'll close the browser and you'll carry on. But effectively, your username and password have just been phished. So, but we'll talk more about passwords in slides to come. If there's an attachment, generally they tend to zip a file up, or at least it comes across as if it's been zipped up. That's normally a dodgy piece of software that they're trying to get you to click on and launch. And often you might double click on something, nothing happens, you think nothing of it, so you carry on. And the key point here is that a phishing attempt these sort of emails are trying to get you to do something. And that's why in the previous slide, where on average it takes over 190 days for an attacker to either utilize their sort of attack device, or the organization won't notice that breach for on average 190 days. We're distributing the slides, so there is a link on there to a white paper that has all of this information and plus more. So please access that too. And there's Google, I think, in partnership with somebody else, has an online tool to try and help you. It's a bit of a game, and it helps you recognize phishing emails. They are getting more and more sophisticated, and I often fail to recognize some sometimes. So the next slide. So this kind of brings us on to the importance of having a strong and kind of, I guess, changing your passwords. We like to kind of give out advice to try and move away from this idea of a password, because a single word is can be broken into. And if we distill it down to two main forms of attacks these days, the man in the middle one is essentially what I've kind of been talking about, where an attacker pretends or purports to be somebody within your organization or somebody that you know and trust. And there's various different ways they can do that. Quite simply, a social engineering sort of method is by picking up the phone and pretending to be somebody from the IT department. A more advanced one is if an attacker compromises your head of finance's email account, and then they kind of, that's called whaling. So they try and find the most critical person within a business, and they can specifically target that individual. Now, your password is broken into or essentially attacked by using a brute force attack. So all that means is that instead of the traditional brute force is somebody trying to guess a password. Naturally, attackers have systems and software applications to help them do this. And you can download these applications on the dark web, but that kind of, again, not to scare you, but anybody can go on the dark web and download these apps which help you in an attack. So it's very prevalent. Often people think, well, it'll never happen to me because they've got nothing to steal from me, but it does, and it will happen to you on a frequent basis. So it's important that you have a strong password, and we try and move away from the notion of a word and say have a passphrase. So a string of words connected together in a sentence is far trickier it's almost exponentially more difficult to hack or to brute force attack, because of the fact that they use what's called a dictionary attack, or a dictionary file with everybody's commonly used passwords, such as favorite football teams, you know, birth dates or dogs' names or whatever. And they do put numbers at the end of them, and they do use special characters such as the @ sign for A's. So if you've got a password and you think that you're using a strong character by putting an @ sign instead of an A, please change it immediately. So on to the next slide. Probably the most critical thing, and if there's one thing you take away, and we always beat this drum, is to use two-factor authentication. So what is two-factor authentication? Essentially, your password or your passphrase is one factor, and another factor is the devices that you have that you might have used it in accessing your bank account, or you might have 365 deployed, and you could have an authenticator app. There's a Microsoft one, there's a Google one, there's an Apple one. I think there's an Apple one. And these authenticator apps give you the second authentication method. So hence the word two-factor. There are multi-factor authentication methods out there as well, where you have more than two. But for this stops an attacker dead in their tracks, because even if you were to put your password, your username and password in an email, they need that second factor authentication. So it's really critical that if you go to your IT departments or your IT team or whoever that may be, to implement two-factor authentication as quickly as possible. There's other sort of benefits, specifically with 365 or Microsoft 365. You get it is fairly easy to set up. There is some kind of work that you've got to do depending on how you set this up and whether your team has kind of company mobile phones, and so there's some management issues or political things that you need to address on the side, as well as some technical concerns. The Microsoft 365 specifically you can if a member of the team chooses not to use an authentic or multi-factor authentication, you can make a policy within the organization to block access to emails or the Microsoft 365 portal externally to any external machine, and that can just essentially stop any attacker from even getting anywhere near the resource, and that's recommended if you don't implement two-factor authentication, or don't want to implement two-factor authentication. The kind of third and slightly more advanced feature is geofencing. So you do, depending on your tenant, on your account with Microsoft 365, you can enable geofencing, which essentially distinguishes whether a user, a legitimate user of the system, uses some kind of algorithm to detect where, you know, if I log into my machine at home, if I then log into it from, I don't know, LA, let's say, it'll know that there's no possible way I can get from home to LA within a few hours. So it will block access to that potential attacker that's trying to access me from somewhere, access my information from somewhere. Next slide, please. So what are the best security features of Microsoft 365? The key kind of takeaway, again, is multi-factor authentication, but there are other features that or maybe sort of data protection features that you can use within your business. And this is there's an acronym called DLP, or data loss prevention. It's heavily used in professional services, from insurance to financial, and it's something that we can definitely talk to our customer base about should you wish to implement this. In essence, what it does is it stops the kind of leaking of your data, whether that's from an external attacker or somebody within your organization taking data and trying to distribute it to an external third party that shouldn't have rights to that. Or how do you control or manage the rights to that data? So in this example, you've got a third-party kind of marketing provider talking to the marketing manager within the organization, asking for a list of customers because they want to do a direct mail campaign. And in scenario one, the marketing manager puts it on Dropbox, sends it to the user, and that user can print and distribute and email and forward on and put it into WhatsApp or whatever they choose. They can do that. With DLP, your Microsoft 365 feature would block that from happening, and it would only allow you to share that via the SharePoint application. So, and it can go beyond that. Within the file of this list of all your customer names, you can protect the file individually, or you could say that the DLP moves with the file rather than kind of, it's not separate. It's not a separate set of information. But what that could do is stop that user from printing the file, for example. You can set a time limit on how long the user can access that data in days, for instance, or you can stop that user from copying that data, doing a copy paste into another third-party application. In fact, that goes right back to your internal team. You can stop users copy and pasting a single word into WhatsApp or an application that's not controlled by your IT department. So it's very powerful. So what are the best practices around securing your home broadband router? Obviously, that's extremely pertinent during this time. There's some key points. The first thing to consider when you, and if you haven't done this, please do change your default password. A lot of people will buy or provision a home broadband connection outside what we call shadow IT. So it's outside of the remit or the scope of your organization's IT department or third-party IT provider, and they'll plug it all in, get going, everything works, well and fine, but they'll forget to do some key things. So changing your password, the default password, even if you do get one from Virgin or BT where they have a unique password that's on the back of those little plastic card things. Mark will talk about that in more detail, but please change your password and use a complex password. UPnP is a technical term that stands for Universal Plug and Play. Essentially what it does is it helps gamers and things like that automatically creates holes in your firewall without you doing anything in a dynamic way. If you don't have sort of teenage gamers that will kick off if you block that or if you disable that, it's worth doing out of the box if you're not using it. It's a kind of general rule of thumb. If you're not using it, disable it. It's just less surface area for attack. Naturally, not all firewalls are created equally. There's some kind of basic firewalls which effectively just turn on and off ports. And a port is essentially, imagine a brick wall. Imagine you taking a brick out of the wall. I think there's a Pink Floyd song there somewhere. But if you're taking a brick out of the wall, that's effectively punching a hole in the firewall to allow data in and out. And that we refer to that as a port. So 9 times out of 10 routers will come with a firewall, not necessarily an advanced firewall, but they should be enabled out of the box. But often, people turn them off because things don't work. So you take a sort of blanket approach. You disable the firewall, things work, and you forget to enable them again. DMZ is just techno-babble for a demilitarized zone. It's a technical virtual way of saying that anything you put in there, generally there's no firewall in front of it, or there's a limited firewall protecting that device. So imagine you've got taking a fireproof, bulletproof safe and storing it sort of outside the castle walls, or putting a wooden fence around it and expecting it not to be broken into. a key thing is firmware. So quite often you'll buy something off a shelf. It will be released with firmware version 1, 2, or 3 or something fairly sort of new. And as days and weeks and months go by, the vendor of that or the manufacturer of that device will release security firmware updates. It's important that you update your home broadband router with that firmware. And especially if you've got older legacy devices, more modern ones, the manufacturer kind of builds in an automatic update feature. Sometimes they're not enabled by default, so it's worth just double checking that. That's a very critical thing, and that doesn't necessarily mean just your broadband router. If you've got baby monitors, anything connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form, needs to be updated from a firmware standpoint as regularly as possible. Obviously, changing your Wi-Fi key from many defaults and using sort of good standards. So at a minimum WPA2, which is a wireless protocol standard. WPS is a kind of it's there to help people connect wireless devices to the home broadband router. If you don't use it or don't know what it is, turn it off. I think it helps, like with a Skybox. You press the WPS button on your router, and then you do the same on your Skybox, and you don't have to type in any passwords or SSID names or anything like that. But just disable it if you're not using it.
Thank you for that, Justin. I think what we picked up was from our customers who went through these were the questions that they wanted to know, which were mass importance, and we collated them together. And it helped them in terms of just hopefully prompting in the right direction of what they can do while they're working from home, but also just general good cyber security. I'm going to move on to talk about the Cyber Essentials framework and accreditations. Just a quick poll for everyone. Thanks, Simon, for that. Do you know if your business is Cyber Essentials accredited at the moment? I'm curious to know if you can fill that in for us. Because it is
anonymous, by the way. Sorry, just to interrupt there. So we're not gonna kind of come after you if you're not.
And hopefully Simon will share those in a minute with us when they've come in. But I'll continue while you're filling those in. Oh, there you go. So 37% have Cyber Essentials, and 47% don't, and 16% don't know. Hopefully, what I'm going to show you then over the next few slides is what Cyber Essentials is and why, combined with what Justin's just said in terms of ensuring that you're following best practice within the business. Cyber Essentials can hopefully tie up some of the loose ends from a technical standpoint and also actually at the board level. So what is Cyber Essentials? It's actually a framework which has been developed by the National Security Centre. That's then passed to IASME, which is the accreditation body. And then we as a certification body provide that out to companies and help them through the process. If you look at the government's website, it says that 80% of cyber attacks can be prevented by implementing Cyber Essentials. We'll talk about the remaining 20% towards the end of these slides, actually. But by doing what's within Cyber Essentials, which fundamentally is a question set and an assessment to a business and making changes on the back of that assessment, it will stop 80% of attacks into your organisation. The idea being that it is looking at some of the weaknesses that you have in the network and just really checking them off, because ultimately attackers from the outside will always look for weaknesses. And if we can just stop those ones creeping in, you're going to basically move them on to somebody else. So when we talk to people about Cyber Essentials, we say, well, why should you consider it? Why is it important to it, basically? For one, it shows your customers that you care about your data. And we can't emphasize that enough, to be honest, being a Microsoft partner, well, just an IT support business, really. Every customer we look after, we know, we've asked them already, that they do take notice of how we treat their data. So you, by having Cyber Essentials, can show your customers that you treat their data with sensitivity and you really consider it. We've seen it has a knock-on effect to insurance premiums. So we know that some people, some insurance companies will look favourably on businesses who have cyber essentials. And if you already got it in place, if you decide to take out a cyber premium, which are out there at the moment a lot and will be out there forever, to be honest, given our current state of affairs with cybercrime, it can be a positive impact on what you pay for that, so it can help pay for itself in some regards. It helps you review your data, and I think that's always worth doing. We're a firm believer in continuous improvement within the business, and ultimately this is a process that can help you do it year on year. It's a bit like an MOT. You do it on such a date in the calendar year, and then you basically have to do it again and again. So you're always going to be looking at the processes you have in place to protect that information. It'll set you, we've had people use it to set themselves apart from the competition, but actually more importantly, the government supply chain is now saying that people who want to work on those tenders have to have cyber essentials in place. So anybody who does a tender for the government, or actually now does a tender for a tier one supplier, it will ask them, do you have cyber essentials, or are you working towards cyber essentials? Because the government, and we don't see it like this, but the government see it as the entry level bare minimum to be able to work with those contracts. So it is becoming mandatory, and we've had quite a few businesses over the last 6 months alone say, oh, my biggest customer now says I need to have cyber essentials, or I had this contract with the government for 3 years, it's up for renewal, and now I need to get cyber essentials. So it is worth ignoring that. What we actually really like about it is it forces board level sign off. So as part of the question set in the assessment, it's a mandatory fail if you don't have a board level member actually sign the documentation and approve that any changes and the answers are correct. Ultimately, that's a good thing, because we've seen a lot in the past where IT managers or senior managers want to implement a lot of these cyber changes to protect the business because they can see glaring holes in the defence, but they can't get board level to do it, whereas Cyber Essentials makes that mandatory. So we'd recommend, if that's one of the reasons why you're looking at it, you go through that as well. Kind of what is it? So fundamentally, it's a framework. It's a framework built around these 5 pillars of a network, and the term boundary is used a lot. And by that, we mean it could be a bricks and mortar house, or, well, house at the moment, or office building. And what you do is you look at that boundary and you try and look at all the ways that people can break into it and fix those problems. So it looks at your firewall and your connectivity, and at the moment that's obviously spreading out to home usage. It looks at your PCs and how you secure those down. It looks at how you update those machines as well, and how you actually control the administrator accessing them, and how you actually do your antivirus. So what we did was we just put together a slide for each one of those with some example questions. And what I'd really like to promote is, when we're going through these, think about your network now, and if you can answer these in a positive manner, because that will give you a good indication whether you would meet the requirements and whether actually your network is really secure. So for the firewall and internet gateway configuration, which to be honest is just their way of describing your router or your firewall device in the network, are you sure that all the services on that router, so the device which sits here between the internet and the inside, are you sure that all the services on that firewall have been configured how you want it to be? So for example, at the moment, we've got a lot of customers who are sat at home working, like we all are now. They've still got their servers in their office here internally. And we've opened up some of the rules on the firewall to allow people sat at home here to connect to them. Now, Cyber Essentials customers, or any customer, should know that that's happening actually, and document that out. And what the government will ask you is, do you know that's the case? And do you know that you've got a good reason for it? The reason for that is, when it comes to an end and we all go back to what is it, the new normal? What's going to be the new normal, where we work in the office or work from home, a bit of both? Are we going to turn these off? Or are we going to lock these down? Because what an attacker does is just have a piece of software that just scans the entire internet well, not the entire internet, but a lot of the internet very quickly, and looks for these little holes in the firewalls. And if it finds one because someone's not shut it down, they'll then lead on with that to try and break into the network. So Cyber Essentials is saying to you, do you actually know how your firewall is configured? And have a consideration of that within your current network setup. The next section, which is about securing your devices, as Justin alluded to in the question set, which we got from our customers about what is a strong password. The government will actually say, do you have a password policy that guides your users? So it's just did imply having a password which is just password 1 is not acceptable. It should be something longer, like a passphrase, or something which is more complex and has got special characters in it. That's great and well, you saying you do it, but do all your staff actually know that happens? And has that been actually done and set up on your network across the board and is automatic? So when you get a new starter, so Bob comes and starts in your office next week, and he sets his password up, is he allowed to put password 1 in there? And do you have a documented policy? So a lot of what Cyber Essentials talks about is actually written policies. So in his induction pack, does he know that his password policy can't just be X, Y, Z? And it has to have strong characters. It has to be non-guessable. And also, very lastly on this, do you log passwords for yourself or for your users? It's a mandatory fail if you've got written passwords within your organisation, because there's no technical reason why you would, to be honest. It's very much based on a legacy kind of thought process. Your IT partner, your IT administrator should be able to get into other people's accounts without you needing to know their passwords. So again, it's worth considering that. A large part of Cyber Essentials is ensuring things are up to date. That is across the board, from hardware, operating systems and applications. So when we talk about things like this, it's ensuring that all patches, critical patches and firmware are updated on your devices within 14 days. And importantly, this includes things like Adobe Reader, Java, and other applications outside just Windows. So it's sometimes a misconception that what we're looking for here is just making sure that your Microsoft Windows 10 is up to date. Very relevant in the last few months, because Windows 7 went out of date and therefore is no longer supported. But also it does include other operating systems, such as Mac. So if you've got a Macintosh, it's no longer a get out of free jail card for antivirus protection and these kind of things. They become so prevalent these days that actually attackers go after Macs now. So you do need some kind of protection and some awareness of that. Are you updating your Adobe Reader and Java and things which are installed on PCs by default? And are you sure that they're updated every 14 days? And if you're not sure, then you have to have a written process or a document that you can prove. Or actually, good IT companies will put a bit of software on your machine and it'll do it automatically for you. But that's a huge part of Cyber Essentials, making sure things are up to date. Do you know who has admin rights to your server? There's a whole section on this within the process and within the framework. It's quite interesting, actually. So do you actually know who has admin rights to your network and your server at the you sit here now? Kind of a rhetorical question, I know. But fundamentally, if you had a new starter, so let's go back to Bob, and he starts in marketing next Monday, and you send that form off or you send that request off to your IT company, do you tell them to create the rights limited for Bob? So if he works in marketing, he should really only have access to the marketing drive. The reason for that is if Bob shares his password, just like Justin was talking about in terms of the man in the middle of the attack, and he has a phishing email, he's clicked the link, he's put his Office 365 credentials into that link, he's then let somebody else log in as him into the network. If he only had rights to the marketing drive, they would only be able to get to that, and they wouldn't be able to get to accounts or anything else. So when you look at your users, are they restricted by their job role? Do you document that? And do you let your IT partner, your IT department know that's the case? And Cyber Essentials will push you on that to make sure that is there. And because it's a year-on-year process, it'll also ask you to review all the admin rights you have on your server at the moment. So we, as a managed IT provider, have admin rights on all our customers. Hopefully our customers say that's okay. But the ones who review it will let us know if that's possible. But if you left the door open to a third-party software vendor 6 months ago while they fixed your Sage, for example, and then didn't shut it, because that's just a bit more of the surface area for an attacker to get to. And what they will do in Cyber Essentials is ask you those questions and check. And then very lastly, part of Cyber Essentials is basically to actually make sure you've got antivirus protection. Now, it's a really simple section. However, it does have one little caveat to it. That also includes mobile phones and tablets these days, because everyone has emails and documents, and as Justin also alluded to, you can share these documents out via 365, G Suite and other cloud services on mobile devices. It's really important, actually, that you take them into consideration, Because what we're talking about here is very much the technology side of the equation. And also making sure that even devices like mobiles and tablets have some kind of protection on them. And you'll be asked, do you have that? Because you've got emails on there, for example. Now, iPhones and Android devices work differently in terms of how they protect themselves. So it's worthy also knowing which devices and the types of devices you've got within your networking infrastructure to protect it. But it is a question which we will get asked to make sure that you're covered in that regard. What the actual process is to go through the assessment and implement any changes that are required. And I really need to highlight how selecting the right partner is important there. And I know we do this, so this is not a sales thing at all. But Cyber Essentials will ask you to make some changes, so it's worthy of note that there may be a cost associated with that outside of the assessment itself. There's a question set that comes from the National Cyber Security Centre. When you're going through that, do you just want to answer the questions and forget about it, as in you're going to do it yourself, but some are quite technical, or do you want somebody to work with them, work you through the questions? And the remedial changes that have to happen, as mentioned, there's usually always one that needs to be done. I think everyone we've done over the last 6 months or so, there's always some form of change, whether you've got old Windows 7 devices, you've got an old policy that needs applying. There's always something included. It's always, if your partner's not clear about the upfront about the charges, you might get a little bit stung in that regard. So we do try and forward think people there. You submit the assessment, and then you either get a pass or fail. I can't remember the last company who passed it first time, I'll be honest. It usually fails, but it's driven a little bit like the MOT analogy used before. You basically, if you fail it, you can rectify those problems and then resubmit it again. And there's usually no charge to submit it again to rectify those. So when we say to people, things you should consider when thinking about Cyber Essentials is, again, really consider the company you're working with, because most accreditation companies just send you the questions. You log into the websites and answer those and try and get through those. If you've got a technical expertise in-house, that's absolutely brilliant, because they'll just go through and make the remedial changes. If you don't, then it's worthy of note that you just need to focus and think about those costs beforehand. And then what the government also does is give you a website you can search for these. So if you're looking down your supply chain to make sure that they say they've got Cyber Essentials, if they do, or you want to make sure that who you work with has Cyber Essentials, you can search for their valid certificate on that web page, and it'll tell you if they exist or not, so you can prove it basically. Very lastly, actually, and really outside of Cyber Essentials, but we really want to cover this, is the human factor. As Justin alluded to at the start of this presentation, the human factor is the other 20%, if not more, these days because of phishing. So Cyber Essentials is part of a multi-layered approach, but fundamentally still really consider the humans in your organisation. We're all guilty of clicking the wrong link or believing the wrong email that comes through. So it has to be built into what you look at. It has to be considered as part of that protection of your organisation. So Cyber Essentials is absolutely brilliant, but when we do the Cyber Essentials, the contracts we offer, we actually include phishing assessments and phishing tests, because ultimately that's currently the trend to break in. So you protect your bricks and mortar with Cyber Essentials, and then you upskill and educate your users through some fake phishing and encryption of devices to make sure that they're not the weak link in the equation. Just some useful links we've found over the past. The top one is a link to the Cyber Essentials website and what's included in there. And then the second one down is actually GDPR related, still very relevant, still obviously enforced. And GDPR says that a good starting point is to make sure that you're in line with the requirements of Cyber Essentials. So if you're unsure about your GDPR requirements within your organisation, then Cyber Essentials is also, a worthy starting point for that. And then very lastly, just go back to that importance of accreditations. We had it at the second slide in. The reason why we put it at the end really is just to show you that, it matters and it can be outwardly presented to people of why you take care of data and why actually, to be honest, Cyber Essentials plays a huge part in this, because it shows to your suppliers, to your customers that you're covering that. And the Cyber Essentials stamp, which you get one of these logos. Should be noted as well, there's two versions of Cyber Essentials. They roughly follow the same tact. So Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. The difference between Cyber Essentials Plus is, even though it's the same questions, an assessor will actually come to your premises or virtually now and look through the information in huge amounts of detail, where in the normal cyber essentials, they will basically take your word for it in some regards, which we don't actually agree with. We will check everything out, but there is 2 levels. What we did was we put together a little bit of an offer. So if you decided to go down cyber essentials with Seriun, we work on a monthly contract, and we will give you 3 months free of charge as part of that contract in terms of implementing and making you get through it. But ultimately, I hope that myself and Justin will give you an idea of cyber at the moment, and also what cyber essentials and what the process is. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. I think we've got a few questions come in. Simon, how are we going to respond? Should we
Yeah,
just
go on.
pick them up, or?
Yeah, do you want to, Becky? Do you want to unmute your mic and put your question directly to Mark and Justin?
Hi, yeah. I have some clients that use the LastPass, like the LastPassword security. I was just wondering, what's your thoughts with that, with terms to obviously using your passcodes and things, basically just from a security point of view?
So my response to that is, yeah, LastPass is a known kind of brand. It does take the burden away from the individual. So I would definitely recommend using password managers, but just be wary of the password manager, you know, and use a trusted brand. Do your kind of consumer research, and if it's in a business setting or an organization, I would definitely speak to IT on that front, because a number of organizations already have password managers that they've chosen or you know, are recommended to use. So you might be kind of shadowing your IT department. But on the whole, password managers specifically or contextually, because of the fact that we've got so many different systems that require password access, are a great help.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Shaf, do you want to come in?
Guys, 2-factor authentication. Now, I myself personally use Google Authenticator, which works fine. I didn't realize Microsoft had come out with one. Was that one that you'd recommend more on Google, or what are the differences between all these different apps?
Yeah, I can answer that if you wish.
Yeah.
It's personal preference, to be honest, Shaf. So the authenticators all work in a similar manner. The Microsoft one is really good because it pops up with the token on your device. But if you've already got Google Authenticator working for 5 or 6 different applications already, you can choose to use that. And there's kind of a consortium where they allow any authenticator to work on single sign-on for those applications. So it more comes down to personal preference of what and also what you've got in other applications, actually.
Just to add to that, Mark, the one thing we didn't really talk about, which you just mentioned, is single sign-on. So it's another advanced feature of these kind of overarching platforms like G Suite and 365 and so on and so forth, is the ability, specifically on Microsoft 365, you can add applications that are kind of single sign-on compatible already into the 365 application kind of pool. So what it means is that if the vendor, let's say, I don't know, could be Salesforce, for example, has got single sign-on capability, you add the app into your 365 tenant, and that means it uses your 365 account information, username and password, and multi-factor functionality to access the Salesforce website. So you can significantly reduce the number of accounts that people are trying to juggle, you know, and therefore potentially move away from having password managers and things like that to a single sign-on tenancy.
Chef, just to round off the question, because we get this quite a lot from customers, when people set up 2-factor authentication on, say, 365, if they're not comfortable using an authenticator app, then we would recommend they at least text a distinct number, or actually you can get it to phone a landline. So if you've got a direct dial in the office, to give you a two-factor token. So sometimes apps can be a little bit scary for people. So there are other options to set up two-factor which aren't as difficult.
Just take notes if you do that sometimes people have extensions and then it dials like an IVF or an IVR, excuse me, an IVR. So the automated system dials and gets the IVR, i.e. press 1 for sales, 2 for whatever, and then you kind of lose the call. So most, I think, allow you to put an extension number in those, but just be wary of that rather. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry. Got another
yeah, go on, Chef.
If a machine on our network still is running Windows 7, but we have a legitimate business case for it, would that still negate to a fail?
Yeah, so I can answer that actually, because we had that with a customer only last month. So it's very common that you find like all manufacturing systems, CNC, or some kind of device has got a PC on the back of it that can still be Windows 7. Or there's the reason why people still have Windows 7 is usually because there's an application which can't be upgraded to Windows 10, and that can be a problem. So by default, it is a mandatory fail. However, the assessor has kind of a set remit to follow. And what they'll do is look at the reasons why you've still got a Windows 7 machine on the network. What can be really useful is you can use your firewall and other devices to ring fence that Windows 7 machine. So it doesn't connect to the internet, it doesn't get to your network for file sharing, it doesn't get past anything that you need it to. If you can prove you've done that, and you can show documentation for it and the reasons why you're still on Windows 7. So for example, we've got one customer who's still on Windows 98 actually, for one of their devices, but it'll cost them £1.5 million to change their machine to fix it. So they've taken the approach of ring fencing that device. So it's not even connected to the internet. If you can prove that and show good reason, the assessor will, we've had customers where that's passed, to be honest. You also just make sure on your firewall, you basically exclude it from any internet access, and then that no one can come in from the outside world to break into that device.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Shaf. I've got a question from Jen. I've got one as well, though, and it's partly personal and partly business related. We've got 30 odd staff all working from home with varying levels of antivirus software or anti-malware on their PC. I'm just running Windows Defender. Is that enough? And am I putting the chamber at risk by logging onto our VPN with a machine that's only got Windows Defender on and doesn't have any proper antivirus on?
It's a really good question, actually, and I'll try not to drop your IT manager in it. So we've had a number of requests like this. In all honesty, yeah, we would class that a bit of a problem, to be fair. If you're using a personal device to VPN into a network, for a huge percentage of our customers who don't have IT managers, we've restricted that as much as humanly possible. Where it's not been possible, we've extended the antivirus, the commercial antivirus, which is managed out to personal devices. Justin alluded to it a second ago in the presentation. It's this shadow IT where you're using a device and just setting up stuff on it a little bit willy-nilly, and your IT manager kind of has no idea this is happening, so loses control. It's a trade-off, to be honest. We would heavily recommend you use a commercial device which has got antivirus on it, it's protected, because when you connect it to the VPN, you kind of extend your network around your PC, and if it's infected with anything, it can then easily get to the servers. So in all honesty, Simon, it's not something we would personally recommend.
All right, so I'm not actually using it for the VPN, but I am using it now for Zoom because it's a faster processor, so I get the background on Zoom. But even it is logged into my Microsoft Teams.
That's okay, because Teams is protected. Okay. So as long as you're not sharing loads of Word and Excel files, but Microsoft also scan the files as they go up. The easiest answer we've come up with this across the base is just extend your commercial antivirus out to the personal machines. Most are built by the month, to be honest, so the cost is negligible, and you get all the protection needed just for that small cost.
Okay, thanks. Jen, do you add, and if anyone else has any questions, just quickly raise your hand or pop them in the chat box. We've got 2 minutes left. So Jen, do you want to quickly put your question?
Let Mike go. I think Mike Wilson had one.
Oh, go on. Sorry, Mike. Hello, Mike. Is he still there?
You need to unmute yourself.
I don't think Mike's got one.
Oh.
Oh no, he hasn't. He's just waved in his ear. My only
I
question.
haven't got one.
Sorry, I saw
Nice
you.
to see you, Mike. Anyway.
Hi, Mike.
He's just having a stretch. No, my only question was, if we're advising some of the other chamber members about on the back of this session, is there any limit as to the size of business when Cyber Essentials becomes either null and void or obsolete? Is it ideal for smaller businesses or mediums or huge ones, or is it all of them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really good question. In honesty, as a company who likes to promote cyber awareness, we'd say it's applicable for every business because you deal with data. There's no mandatory minimum or limit for it. There's no recommendation at all. We've got some businesses with only 1 or 2 staff who have Cyber Essentials. They're driven more by the tenders that they do, for example. But no, there's absolutely no limit. And in all honesty, there's a cost associated with it. But if you, we would recommend it for everyone because it makes you really consider protecting the data that you hold.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, Jen, it's probably the start or the tip of the iceberg that most, if not all, businesses should start to consider from from micro to large enterprise. Yes, as you start scaling up to large enterprise and blue chip companies, it's certainly a how do I put it? It's probably the last thing that you should be focused on to protect you, but whereas in a micro business, it's the first thing you should be focused on to protect you. So in a large enterprise, there's a host of other tools out there to try and reduce the attack surface, to find threats and to mitigate those threats. But they can cost tens of thousands up to maybe even hundreds of thousands of pounds in the enterprise. So from a micro business standpoint, even if you're a one user business, there's obviously a cost associated with Cyber Essentials, but it differentiates you from your competitors if they don't have it. And the cost is not that great to make it sort of unviable for a one man or a one person business.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Justin. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Team Seriun. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on Chamber Live. We're going to make this webinar available on our YouTube channel later on today after Shaf's done his magic on the graphics. And we will also circulate the slides with those useful links in as well to everyone who registered for the event. So if we can just have a wave and a thank you for our speakers.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you.
And
Thanks.
yeah, thank you, Simon, and thanks, Chamber, for all your help and inviting us on.
No, you're very welcome, and thank you. Please do check out chamberlive.co.uk for all our future events. Stay safe, everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.